This episode is powered by PodDecks.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Go Talk podcast. Today is a very special day on the Go Talk podcast. If you remember, about a month or so ago, I announced that we had our newest sponsor, PodDecks, which is a company for podcasting. They provide decks of cards you can use in interviews and things like that. And so today on the Go Talk podcast, we have the creator of PodDecks coming on the show, Travis Brown. We're going to be talking about PodDecks, his own podcasting experience, how he got into podcasting, things like that. So we're going to bring, I'm going to bring Travis in, and then we'll get started with the interview. Hey, Travis, how are you? How you doing?
I'm great, man. I got a hot, fresh cup of coffee here with me, and I'm ready to rock out on your podcast with you.
How's the quarantine been treating you and things of that nature?
It's definitely been an interesting year. I have two small children, and every time we get sort of locked down again, we're heavily reacquainted. So keeping little kids occupied has been an interesting journey for me. But I'm an optimist, so I just look at it like, this has given me an opportunity to do some things I couldn't do before. So I'm trying to leverage those and just focus on the things that I can do.
That sounds great. So usually on my interviews, before we actually jump into the questions, I ask questions from PodDecks. And so
nice.
You are the creator of PodDecks, it's actually kind of cool to ask you some of your own questions.
Sure.
My first question is, what sparks your creativity, makes the wheels turning in your head? How does that, where does your creativity come from?
Sure. So my creativity generally comes through a couple of different ways. So I'm a musician and an artist, and a lot of times that stuff kind of like, it's sort of, I want to say like given to me, like I'll hear a song in my head and it's like, until I make it a reality, it's sort of like a curse, So a lot of times I'm sort of see things, and the times I generally see things is when I'm not trying to see them. So we've all had those great shower thoughts and stuff, because your brain is like, I don't have to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
As far as other creative ideas, I'm always just trying to figure out from a business standpoint, like how I can serve and solve a problem for somebody. So I have a whole idea orphanage. I have more ideas than I've executed on, but I will think of a great idea and I'll put it on my list of ideas. And then I can spend time focusing on developing one and seeing where it goes. And, creativity is just part of my personality. So I'm very blessed with that. Now, some stuff I can't do very well is like Excel spreadsheets and stuff like that. So, so I'm not very creative there, but yeah, generally it's just a matter of imagining what would be really cool to see in the world.
That's cool. So what do you geek out about? Like, what gets you really in your nerdy side of you?
Sure. Well, I go through phases with things. What I'm geeking out about right now is screen printing. So it's a form of art. I know a lot of people do it on t-shirts, but I'm actually doing it on like wood panels. And so it's an entire process. You have to design something, you have to expose a screen, there's emulsion, there's all these things. And I've been like sort of throwing myself into learning that craft. So that's something I've been geeking out about. So I've got a whole rig in my basement with, a light box and all these different things, which my family thinks I'm crazy for. Before that, I think the last thing I geeked out about is just I read a book called Rocket Men. That's about the Apollo 8 space mission, which was the one that actually proved that we could get to the moon and back before we actually landed on the moon. And all that stuff is so fascinating. The fact that these guys went up, had a 30% chance of coming back in a little capsule, like it's just a phenomenal story. So I think I went pretty deep into the whole like NASA history and all these guys.
And then my last question is, if you became president, what would be the first law that you would pass?
Oh, wow. That's a big one, man. The first law I would pass, there's so many things that I'd like to do as president. I think what I would do is some form of, if it was right this minute, I would do some form of universal type of income right now where everybody is if you're a business owner, we're going to cover the cost of keeping your business open. If you own a home, or if if you're out of work, like everybody's going to get what they need to get through this time.
Right.
So maybe we could be less angry and trapped and, rude to each other.
Yeah, that sounds like a great law to pass, especially for right now.
Yes.
So again, PodDecks, obviously created by Mr. Travis Brown here, are unique interview questions that you can use in your interviews. So whether you're an already existing podcaster or a new podcaster trying to grow your audience, PodDecks are going to be great for you. Head over to poddecks.com, use the code GTP2020 for 10% off your first order. So speaking of PodDecks, again, you are the creator of PodDecks. So walk us through, how did you come up with the idea of PodDecks? What was the motivation behind it? And what feedback have you gotten about PodDecks since you've created them?
Sure. So PodDecks was actually an accidental business. So I do podcast editing at a company called Podcast Buddy, and I would talk to people who thought they wanted a podcast editor, but maybe weren't a good fit, or maybe they couldn't afford it. So I decided I would build a course, because one of my goals is to help as many people podcast as possible. So I created this course called Shortcut to Podcasting. So I gave you everything I knew, or you could do one step a day for 30 days and launch a podcast. And as part of buying that course for me, I thought it'd be really cool to give people a list of questions that I had that were really unique interview questions to help them get started in interviewing. So when people bought my course, I was going to secretly send them a package with this deck of cards. And so when I launched the course, not a lot of people were interested. They were just like, I'm not really interested. And then I kept promoting it, but I kept promoting the cards. And so people would email me and say, hey, I don't want the course, but how do I buy those cards? And more than one person did it. So it was like, maybe this is something that would be a good tool for people. Now, I thought it was just something like, I had a list of notes on my phone that I called friend questions. And so if I went to a dinner party, or if I went to a place where I felt a little uncomfortable, I would just look at my list and I would ask people these questions, and they always loved it. They always thought like, wow, you should have a podcast. Or, they didn't even know I was a podcaster. But so I decided, okay, let's figure this out. So there's a strategy called the MVP strategy, minimal viable product, right? So before you start a business and go get 7,000 of something printed to sell, start with a few. So I decided, okay, what can I call this? I'll call it PodDecks, right? That's the only thing I could think of. And I pressed 10 decks, and it cost a fortune when you buy it, buy that many, because you're not buying in bulk.
Right.
And I put up an ad that I made on my iPhone on my desk of me flipping through the cards on Instagram, and I sold out in like 10 minutes. And I was like, okay, maybe that was a fluke. And so I pressed 100 this time, and I ran the same ad, and boom, sold out again. And here I am today selling thousands and thousands of PodDecks, and now we actually have an app that people are using. So it was a complete accident, but one of the best things that's ever happened to me. So the response has been amazing. People email me all the time. They say, I went on a first date and I brought PodDecks and it went great and I got a second date. Or I was really stuck and I didn't know where to go next, and then I saw an ad for PodDecks and it really rejuvenated my podcast. So the feedback has been amazing, and the community that I've built around it is even better. Like the connections, people like yourself, getting to know people and interacting with people on this level is just something that I absolutely love.
Yeah, I do. I can say the app has been great. Just sometimes just to scroll through and read the questions. If you are a podcast and you're watching this, download the PodDecks app. It's a great app. It's got different sections. It's got digital cards. It's got the link to the website where you can get hats like the one that Travis is wearing right now, shirts, mugs, all types of cool stuff. So yeah, I love PodDecks. I have like 5 decks of PodDecks in my room. I've used them on my interviews before. So PodDecks, I truly enjoy PodDecks.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Makes me so happy.
Right. So you have been podcasting for some time now. So let's go back into when you first started podcasting. How did you get into podcasting, and what was when you first started your podcast, what were you trying to do with it?
Sure. So when I first started podcasting, it was really easy for me because I had been doing audio engineering for bands. I was in a band and I learned how to record bands, and I was making records for bands. And as I was doing that, the music industry was slowly just crumbling. So people were getting the equivalent of a recording studio on their computer. And so they didn't really need to go to a recording studio, and bands didn't have money because people weren't paying for that. So it just so happened that I had stumbled upon podcasting, and I fell in love with it. I thought I could make this sound really good. I've already got the gear and I know how to make audio sound good. So I'll give it a shot. And so the first thing that I did, just like everyone else does, is I got a couple of my buddies and I said, hey, let's do like a comedy podcast or whatever. So we had a podcast called Unlimited Data. And it was basically we would talk about kind of current events, things that were going on. I think the thing that set us apart from other shows is we actually had specific segments. So we would launch a little intro song before each segment, and we would talk about different things. And it was so much fun. The thing about podcasting is that when you're actually podcasting, it's so much fun. It's sometimes the work afterward or before the podcast that can bring you down, like scheduling or editing or all the things that you need to do as a podcaster. So I started off with that podcast, and then I had many iterations of other podcasts where I was doing a solo podcast sharing stories. I was doing one that was an audio documentary about bands. So I would record them telling me how they created their songs. And then eventually I started helping other people with their podcast. And my company became so popular that I didn't have any time to podcast because I was spending all my time helping other people with their podcasts. So recently I restarted up podcasting and just made it a part of my calendar. I have a podcast called Podcast Therapy.
Yeah.
So it's for podcasters because there's a lot of different things you're going to encounter as a podcaster that are challenges. And so I try to share everything I'm learning while I'm editing other people's podcasts, while I'm studying the industry, while I'm networking with people. And I share all these things to try to help people, propel themselves into having the success that they're looking to get.
So what do you, I just recently have really experienced the true love of the podcasting community. What do you love most about the podcasting community, not just as a podcaster, but also as like someone that provides things for other podcasters?
Sure. So the one thing that I can say the most about the podcasting community is it's a very inviting community. I think that people that are podcasters somewhat understand that there's enough ears out there for everybody, and that collaboration is really a key to success. So for example, me and you are doing an interview podcast right now. So we're going to be leveraging your audience and my audience to share this message with the world. So we're two-timing our output. Yeah. So I think podcasters understand that in a way that it makes it a very collaborative environment where people want to help each other. And the fastest way to get what you want in life is to help other people get what they want. So there is something true to that whole, I think, the reciprocity of helping other people. And so this year, before the pandemic, my last real person event was PodFest in Orlando. It was my first podcast convention. Before that, I had just been sort of on my own little island, and I went there and I met so many amazing people that were just genuinely cool and nice. And it was a nice breath of fresh air coming from like the music industry where everyone's competitive and, there's not a lot of collaboration and, it's dog eat dog, but this was a completely different thing. And I just found that every single person I connect with is a great reminder about human beings. Like there's a lot of great people out there, and it's just a great world to be in because you have the ability to network and make content at the exact same time.
Yeah, it's making content is definitely fun. Like you said earlier, it's just all the other stuff about it, the scheduling and the editing and the promoting, all that stuff that makes it really stressful.
Yes.
You touched on earlier that you have kids. Have you ever talked about your kids on your podcast? Have they ever been on your podcast? Do they watch your podcast? Things like that. Do they enjoy you being a podcaster at all?
So my children are 5 and 3 years old, so they don't really understand. They think every podcast is called PodDecks because I ship everything out of my house and they know what PodDecks are. So they'll grab my microphone and say, Daddy, I'm going to do a PodDecks, which is hilarious because they don't fully get it. And so they haven't been on my podcast, but I'll let them sit at my desk with my Rodecaster Pro and press all the buttons and talk into the mic and hear themselves. And to see the joy that it brings them to do that is plenty enough. And I'm sure at some point they're going to ask me when they can record their very own. Now, I've definitely sat down with them and recorded a podcast that, of course, would never go out into the world. But I hope that I'm inspiring another generation to create value and share their stories with people in the world.
So you just mentioned your Rodecaster Pro, which is something I've been looking at getting for a while now. You are giving away a Rodecaster Pro
Yes.
soon, in a week or so now.
Yep.
You do a lot of giveaways. What is it about giveaways for you that you enjoy the most? And what made you start doing giveaways?
Well, I mean, we all like to win stuff, right? So there's nothing more fun than giving a gift to somebody that you know is going to help them maybe get to the next level, or it's something that they truly need in their life that they maybe have put off purchasing. So, again, PodDecks has allowed me to create a big community, which is one of the most important foundations of my business. And being a part of my community, I want to show gratitude to the people that are in my Facebook group or send me emails or listen to my podcast. So I'm always trying to come up with new things that I can do and give away. Most of them are typically things I personally use. I'm a big proponent of sharing the things that you love and use. And so I've been giving away microphones, and this Rodecaster Pro giveaway is for anybody who's a member of our app can enter this contest. So this one's not a public contest where typically I'll blast out to the world and say, hey, I'm giving away this microphone and you can enter here. But this one is just for my community. And the Rodecaster Pro is just so amazing that I can't wait for somebody to win it because I know it's going to have a huge impact on them. So honestly, man, part of gratitude is giving, right? I don't give to receive, I give to bring joy. So it just makes me happy when I send somebody something and they're like elated and they're excited and it helps them. So I will continue to do giveaways. Actually in the app, we're going to give something away every month, but the giveaways, like it's similar to what I do with charity, so I have charities that I give money to. Or I'll have art projects that I raise money for things like Black Lives Matter or Hesed House, which is like homeless people and things like that. So it's just a part of like who I am. I definitely have been given many things in my life and I'm always looking to give back.
Yeah, I've been following you for a while now, so I know that you're all about, giving and like utilizing tools and things like that to help you build your podcast. One of your tools that you have is the Podcast Builder Club. How did
Yes.
you come up with the concept of that? Explain a little bit what that is, how it works, things like that.
Yeah. So I'm a course creator. So I like this whole business, this whole journey started off with a single course. And, there's lots of different aspects to podcasting. And so what I've learned as a person who likes to buy courses and take courses is that it's really fun to buy the course because you're going to transform into something. But then when you get this giant course, you have to sit through hours and hours and hours of content. And sometimes we don't have time and we forget and we put it off and then we feel guilty. So I decided that instead of making these really long courses, that I would break out individual aspects of podcasting, whether that be social media or editing your podcast or monetizing, things like that. And I would make them into these sort of mini courses that somebody could consume really quickly, get the information and apply it to their podcast so they could start winning. And instead of trying to sell a bunch of individual courses, I just decided, hey, let's just make it an all you can eat buffet, right? You buy a membership and you can access any of the courses anytime you want. And when you're done and you don't want it anymore, you just cancel your membership. So that way you're getting the option to choose your adventure, so to speak. What do you need to learn this week? What do you need to learn this month to apply to your podcast? And then you don't have to buy a giant $700 course and then sift through it. So the idea was to really try to expedite people's success by giving them sectioned off pieces of content that they could use to grow their show.
What do you and you provide a lot of tangible tools. What do you think are some intangible tools for podcasts in terms of growing your audience, keeping audiences engaged, not just from episode to episode, but just from start to finish in each episode? What do you think are some important factors in that?
So tools are like factors.
I mean, either way, like, how do you think? What do you think? Just lost it.
Oh, it's okay. I know where you're going with this. So the first thing that I think that people need to take into account when they're promoting a podcast. So most of the podcasters I talk to, they want a few things. They want more downloaders, they want more audience, they want more listeners, and potentially they want to make some money, right? So what I'm a big proponent of, and I see podcasters doing this all day long, where they're just doing something I call the spray and pray method, where they just try to post their podcast as many places as they can, hoping that if enough people see it, then some people will come in and enjoy. And I think that's actually the opposite way that you should promote a podcast. I think that the number one tool you have is you, and you are a human being. And on the other end of every pair of headphones that's listening to your podcast is another pair of ears, and it's a person. So if you start marketing yourself more in a personal way, whether that be just connecting with somebody on a regular level and then finding out, hey, this person might like my podcast, I'll let them know about it. It's a much more organic way to get listeners. Like if you were walking down the street with me today and I introduced you to my friend, the first thing out of your mouth wouldn't be, check out my podcast, subscribe, rate, and review. You'd
Right.
be like, oh, hey, where are you from? What do you do? Oh, you do this. Oh, I do that too. Oh, you listen to podcasts. By the way, I've got a podcast, right? So it's a more, it takes longer, but the people that you get in the end will stay longer. And podcasting is a long-term game. It's not just about this week's downloads. It's about forever building that audience and building that loyal tribe and community. So I'd say that's probably my number one intangible is, and sometimes I get a little aggressive on Instagram, but I'm like, be a person, don't just try to be an audiogram, meet people. And that's part of the podcasting community is meet people, find people. You never know where your next collaboration or the next person who's going to be able to help you get to the next place. So that would probably have to be my number one tool is just be yourself and meet people. And it's irresistible.
I know you. I know you talk a lot about. You've been on podcasts. You yourself podcast. Do you have a fond memory of a podcast you've been on where you like really enjoyed being on the podcast, or just a memory of you having a guest on your podcast? Do you have a favorite guest?
Um, Honestly, I love people and I love getting to know people, which is why I think I was able to create something like PodDecks because I am absolutely genuinely interested in every person I meet. And typically when I meet somebody, I will basically podcast interview them without a microphone, right? I'm asking them, about themselves, where they come from, what kind of things they're into, how they can. So to me, like this is so second nature. And I'm actually not used to being on that many podcasts and having people ask me questions. I'm usually the one driving the conversation. So this is so much fun. Um, but I don't have a specific particular one person that stands out. Every single person I meet, I feel like I have a deeper connection with. And it's just one of my favorite things to do is talk about podcasting.
So since you said that you are genuinely interested in anyone that you meet, I know this might be a difficult question, but if there was one person that you could pull in for an interview for a podcast, who would that person be and why?
Let's see. The one person I would want to interview, this would probably be a shifting, changing answer, but right now I would love to interview someone like, this is a good question. Probably someone like Dak Shepard, so the Armchair Expert podcast, or somebody who's involved with sobriety. So along my life, I've partied, I've had a crazy awesome life, but as I'm getting older, I'm trying to figure out how to exist without external you know, party favors or, like candy or, alcohol or I'm trying to just like learn how to just exist, which I think is something that is really easy to push to the side. And like, so he's somebody who's, been sober for a long time and has really faced his pain. And I think that would be a really interesting person to get to know.
I think that's great. I can't help but notice you have a rainbow in your on your shelf back there. Did one of your, is that a sponge for one of your kids?
Oh, this is actually a family portrait here. So I'm looking pretty good right there.
That's really nice.
Yeah, so I'm really into creativity, and so I'm always really um just supporting my kids when they're like, I want to color. So like, all right, let's get all the paint and markers out and let's make some stuff. And kids' art is so amazing because they don't care if it's perfect. They just make something and they're like, look at this, I made this. And then they make another thing. And I think there's a really valuable lesson in there for adults that want to make something, is that like, go to your inner child, right? This picture is not perfect, but in its imperfection, it's perfect because it's such a true representation of that moment. So I love keeping stuff like this around. My whole office has art everywhere because it reminds me that like, just keep making stuff, just keep making stuff. And you're going to get better automatically. They're going to get better at art,
Yeah.
but they don't get upset when they go draw out of the line, you know? So think about that the next time you're making something. Like, does it have to be perfect? No, as long as you do something.
All right. And just one more question before I let you go. You've dropped a lot of, different nice gems and nuggets throughout the course of the interview. I just want to, one last question. Is there any last piece of advice you would give, not just to a podcaster, but just to anyone in general about, creativity, following their dreams, pursuing things they want to pursue?
Yeah, absolutely. So my number one recommendation, and this is something that I learned later in life, but make the art, the podcast, the product, the t-shirt that you want to wear or see or hang on your wall. And instead of making things that you think other people would want, or um, trying to make something people want, just make the things you want. And you'll be surprised at how many other people will want the same thing that you do. And you can start to create these amazing things. So if it's a business, or if it's a podcast, or if it's a drawing, just make the thing that you would want to stick on your wall that makes you happy. And I can promise you that other people will enjoy that too. And you'll be able to attract the right people to you regardless of what you're doing. And it's just something that like this hat, like I made this hat because I wanted to wear it. Yes, I sell them and it makes me happy when people buy a hat, but really I just made the hat I wanted to wear. And I sort of do that with everything I do. I made the app that I wanted to have on my phone so I could use it. And it just makes it into something that, is so much easier for other people to enjoy because you enjoy it. So does that make sense?
Absolutely, does make sense. Absolutely. I do want to thank you for coming on. I know it was a little bit weird when I first asked you, like, you don't know anything about sports. But I do want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come on, answer a few of my questions. I haven't personally thanked you for sponsoring my podcast, but thank you for being one of my official sponsors for my podcast. I do truly appreciate it. Like I said, I'm on the PodDecks app almost every day looking at stuff.
Awesome.
Whether it's the toolbox that has like all the different equipment, or your external links for like podcasting hosts and other things like that. So
Cool.
You helped me a lot in indirect ways and direct ways. So I thank you for that. Again, thank you for, coming on my podcast. If you want to see more of Travis, you can follow him on Instagram at PodDecks, PodDecks. If you are a podcast, you want to buy some podcasting gear, the link to buy gear is in his bio. And again, like I said earlier, if you want to buy a pod deck or anything else, you can go to poddecks.com and use GTP 2020 for 10% off your first order. Again, Travis, I want to thank you for coming on the show. As for my audience, thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click on the notification bell, and we'll see you on another episode of the Go Talk podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.